Hey Jubin, do you want to be in the video or not? No? Happy New Year! Welcome to 2024. Hi guys! Welcome back to my channel by bymwu. I'm bymwu, aka Marianne, and I can't believe we're saying this, that it's finally 2024. I honestly think I'm in a little bit of denial. I feel like 2023 just started, and honestly, this is mind-boggling to me. But nevertheless, with the new year here, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the last year, and I realized that it was kind of my first full year of knitting. So today's video is going to be talking about the 8 different things that I learned in my first year of knitting. First and foremost, I apologize if I kind of sound a little nasally. I am recovering from like a head cold or a sinus infection. I'm not entirely sure. I've been trying to put this video off and film it while I like sound better, but it's now my last day of vacation and I need to get this filmed so I can edit it before work starts. Number 2, I've been fighting with the sun all day. I think this is now the 3rd time that I filmed. I think it's finally at a point where it won't blind me anymore. But I apologize if the lighting in this video are going everywhere. I always film with natural lighting, and so it's kind of always a fight to try to figure that out. And lastly, before we get into the video, I want to talk about what I'm wearing today. So this is my Summer Souffle by Laura Penrose. I knit this up in the Katina Cotton Yak, which is probably my most favorite DK weight summer blend yarn. And I absolutely adore this shirt. I don't typically wear t-shirts in the winter time, but it's actually very mild today. Like, we have no snow. We had a green Christmas, quite frankly, and yeah, I was too hot in my wool sweater, so I switched out into a summer tank, or not summer tank, a summer tee. But love this. It has a really cute frill. Talked about it a lot in the past. Would highly recommend this pattern if you are interested in knitting one for yourself. Like I said, 2023 was my first full year of knitting. I was technically not a new knitter when I started 2023. I've knit like a handful of projects in like my past like teenage years, but I never took knitting seriously. And frankly, all of this kicked off because in 2022, I did a temperature blanket, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a blanket where you knit or crochet a row every day that corresponds to the temperature of that day. So my specific rules was that I was doing a crochet row every day and I was corresponding that to the average temperature. That was my project for 2022. By the end of that year, as the temperature blanket was coming to an end, I was really trying to look for more like crafty adventures because I was really enjoying having projects to work on, or that project to work on in that year. Crochet, while I enjoyed it, I found that the way that it looks wasn't something that like I would want every single item in my house to be. It has a very specific style if you guys are familiar with crochet. And so towards December of 2022, I was starting to think about knitting a little bit more and actually cast on the knit dicky that I showcased in my Everything I Knit in 2023 part 1 video. It was just the plain stockinette dicky. I found the pattern for free on Pinterest and finished that project up in January 2023, and that was kind of like the end-all be-all. I was running with knitting by then. And so 2023 from January onwards was my year of knitting, and while I'm not a seasoned knitter, I definitely learned a handful of things. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the things that I learned. There's no particular order for these. Some of these might be a little bit more like life lessons, but they also apply to knitting, so bear with me. But first and foremost, working with your hands is so therapeutic. And while I knew this in the past, I've always been someone who really likes to do crafts and just like be very like tactile, is that the word? I like to bake. I had like a huge drawing phase like prior to 2022. Obviously my whole 2022 temperature blanket was like a hand working project. But something about knitting is just a different kind of therapeutic that I honestly didn't realize until I started, and I don't think I could ever like let it go. For me personally, when I work with my hands, especially when it's the right amount of mental stimulation, my brain goes like silent in the best way, and therefore like my anxiety calms. Life just feels so much simpler and less stressful. On top of that, I think it's so gratifying to be able to like knit up a garment from like scratch. And even if you were to like pull this back even more, like basically every component of like a fiber project, minus maybe physically growing the like fiber from the plant fiber or the animal fiber, like you have to like, you could grow the animal or the plant, but you can't like physically grow that on you. Like everything can be done by hand, and I think that's mind-boggling and so spectacular and just so fascinating. I don't think I would ever go as far as like raising llamas myself or raising sheep myself, but I commend people who do and who hand dye yarn and hand spin yarn, and it's just everything about it can borderline be traced back to being handmade, and I think that's so cool. The next lesson is maybe something that applies like more in general to life, but like I said, also to knitting, and that is for better or for worse, everything is a phase. Now, hear me out. I heard this, I think from like a parenting blog. I don't even know how I got to that page one day, and it got me thinking about how real and true that was and how kind of like freeing that knowledge was. And what I mean by that is that whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, if you remember that it's just a phase and it will pass and that's okay, it gives a lot of freedom back to you because it kind of takes away the power of that situation. And while you can apply this to a larger scale in terms of life, like if you have a kid and they're not sleeping, that's probably going to be a phase. Eventually that will end. On top of that, them being like a toddler is also only going to be a phase. I'm sorry, a lot of this is like children based, but when you apply it to knitting, I think that's so true too. I know that I go through phases in my like knitting trends, and at the time that I do, I can hear myself thinking about like, oh, I wish I had more this, or I wish I did more that. And I think that takes away a lot of the joy of the knitting process. And so when I take a step back and I'm like, you know what? It's a phase. It will pass. It kind of like alleviates that expectation and lets me just move on with my life. An example of this is back in when I was filming the fall 2023 knitting plans, I was noticing a lot of my knitting plans were green. And I was like, I feel like I'm boring. Everything I knit is green. And then even in the season before, everything I was knitting was like a gray or a beige. But you know what? As I look around at my projects now, I have like reds and blues and purples, and the green was a phase. And I was giving myself such a hard time, even though like I should just enjoy it, because ultimately now that I'm in these full color forces, I miss green and maybe I'll go back to it. And now I'm in my whole cable knits and color work projects, and I'm missing the stockinette, and everything is cyclical. And I think once you let go of these expectations that you need to have like all of this balanced at all times, kind of it gives you the freedom to actually enjoy what you're working on at that specific moment. So take that how you will. I found it incredibly kind of like weightlifting, and so I will be moving forward with, for better or for worse, everything is a phase. Number 3 is don't be afraid to try new things. This again can apply to life, but I found that and oftentimes with knitting, I get stuck in what I know, and therefore I have a hard time expanding. But then once you do, your world kind of like grows, and the opportunity for different projects and different techniques like kind of become endless, and it's really fun to explore that. I say this as kind of like a fiber perspective, a skill perspective, a tool perspective. Like you can kind of apply this for everything. My specific instance of this happened when I finally gave double pointed needles an opportunity. So I, for full transparency, am generally a magic looper. I will always use magic loop because that's just what I was taught, and that's just kind of like how I've learned moving, like since I picked up needles. unless I can do in the round. In the round is my preferred way. But like when we're doing like smaller circumference, like socks or sleeves or stuff like that, I always use magic loop. One day I was like, I'm gonna try double pointed needles. So I ordered a pair, or I guess a set, because there's 5 of them in there. And you know what? I really like double pointed needles for sleeves in particular. I still think there's a time and a place for magic loop, but had I not just been willing to try like double pointed needles that day, I don't think I would know. I'm not saying that you should always just like try things for the sake of trying things. If you have that itch and you're like not totally opposed to an idea, it doesn't hurt you. It might hurt your wallet a little bit, so I would say try within reason. But I now know that moving forward, double pointed needles are an option for me. I know for other people, they try it and they absolutely hate it. And that's great too, because you learn that you hate it. And learning these things and knowing these things make you a better knitter, you know? Kind of tying into not being afraid to try new things. Number 4 is kind of once you've tried new things, kind of take memory note of what works so that you choose the right tool for the project. This one bit me in the butt more times than I can say, because like I said, you get into a habit, you kind of just use what you have. And I'm not saying there's anything bad with that, but sometimes you need to put a little bit of thought in terms of how you're gonna use what you have. For example, I had my Mauricia cardigan last year, which if you guys have been following the podcast, you would know that that was my trouble project. And it was my trouble project because I was just having a really hard time working on it. It wasn't fun to work on for me. As much as I adored the pattern, it was a beautiful cardigan, it was too slippery with the mohair. It was on, I think it was on 4mm needles, which in retrospect isn't that small, but at the time I was like, oh, this is so frustrating. It was giving me a lot of hand cramps, and it took me, I think, 7 months to finish that project. And what ended up allowing me to finish it was realizing that my tools were not the right ones for that project. I originally, because this cardigans worked back and forth, had it on like the longest cable that I had in my interchangeable needle set. And with that paired with the mohair, the stitches were just sliding around everywhere and I was having a really hard time controlling it. Hence the hand cramps as well as the really wonky gauge. And so once I realized that and I switched it onto a shorter cable, almost miraculously, a lot of the problems that I was having went away. I also had the same instance when I was using metal needles with acrylic. It turns out I don't like that combination. And so with the previous lesson where you try new things and you learn new things, you can then apply them. Oop, I just hit myself. You can then apply them to new projects to give yourself a better knitting experience. This is also kind of extended in terms of not just tools. I also want to give a shout out to things like acrylic, because as much as I'm a natural fiber girl, there's a time and a place for acrylic, and I don't think we should discount that. It is more affordable in many cases. It's a lot more manageable. Like, you don't have to necessarily hand wash it every time. You don't have to worry of it stretching or shrinking as much as like wool, for example, does. And so I want to put that out there that this also applies to the right like yarn for projects. If you're making a baby sweater that's going to be thrown in the wash every time they spit up on it, maybe wool's not the best option, you know? Like, it is more expensive. Babies grow quickly. It's not as easily to manage in terms of like always having to hand wash that. Like, parents are busy, man. You don't want to do that to them. So also think about the fibers that you're using. Number 5 is one that I feel like people preach to the choir, and that is blocking is magic. But I also would like to add that elastics are magic. These two tools in combination can fix so many things, and I wish I knew them sooner. I feel like people talk about blocking a lot because it is very, very transformative for a finished object. While I personally don't define a finished object as having to be blocked, I do recognize that blocking does really help a finished object. When you think about it, when you're knitting it up, no matter how robotic you try to be, humans are inevitably kind of like random, and so your tension is always a little changing, and the way that you knit changes, and the way that you spun that skein together like has different like tensions in that as well, and all of that gets reflected into the garment. So when you don't block, your stitches can be like uneven, and so blocking can be magic. I would like to add though that you don't always have to wet block. I know that wet block is probably the best option if you want the biggest like before and after, but if you're a lazy blocker like I am, steam blocking is a miracle worker. And don't discount that. Just because you have to block doesn't mean you have to go the formal route and wet block. There is a time and a place for that too though. But my second part to this is that elastics are magic. I know that people talk about putting elastics in like the collars to avoid stretching them out or at cuffs or stuff like that. But I would like to add that I think they don't get enough attention as they deserve, because elastics can also fix problems that you otherwise would have had to like frog. For example, I finished my square neck cami back in I think March last year. And I was talking about it on the podcast how I really love that camisole. However, my straps were a little bit too long, and so they would always like slide off, and then you would see my bra straps underneath. And a lovely commenter mentioned to put elastics in them. And so I did, and it has now become my most favorite project that I've made in terms of just like everyday wear, because it's just so comfortable. The straps don't move anymore, and like this was like $2 elastics that I got from like the local craft store, and it transformed this camisole in a way that I otherwise wouldn't really reach for it. So I would like to say that if you're having a problematic instance and something's too small, try blocking it. If it's too big, try adding elastics in it, and everything along that scale, blocking and elastics will hopefully fix most of your problems. The next one is you can cable without a cable needle. This one is probably not very like mind-boggling to people who are like, yeah, I've been doing that for years. But my mom showed me this a couple weeks ago, and I was like mind blown. So essentially, for those of you who are not familiar with cables, cables are oftentimes where you twist stitches to kind of give them like that crossing effect. And so in order to do that, you actually have to physically like take your stitches and kind of rearrange the order of them so that you can get like a left twist or a right twist or whatever the kind of cable direction that you're kind of going. Hi guys, welcome to my desk. I am inserting a little clip here about the cabling. First and foremost, I apologize if you hear tapping. Jube is walking around in the background and her nails need to be trimmed. She won't stop pacing for some reason. Anyways, I just knit up a little swatch here. It's just plain stockinette to show you guys what I meant by the whole cabling without a cable needle. So for those of you who aren't aware, like I said, cabling is just a matter of crossing stitches so that you can get like a crisscross, either right cross, left cross, depends on what you're trying to achieve. But how you would historically do that with a cable needle is, let's say we wanted to do like a 3-stitch right cross, i.e. we want the right stitches to be behind, so cross to the back. You would take the next 3 working stitches off, put them on a separate needle, hence the cable needle here, this 3rd needle. You would leave them in the back. Sometimes it gets a little finicky. Usually cable needles are not this long. I'm just using a double point needle I had. You would then continue working with the active row. So I would knit 3. Then you have the option of actually passing the stitches that are on that cable needle back to your regular one, or working off the cable needle. So I will work off them here. Can be a little finicky, like so. So if I finish this row up, you can see that the stitches that were originally on the left side are now crossing towards the right, and the stitches that were on the right side are now crossed behind in the back to the left. And so you get this really pretty cross here, right? And this is what it looks like from the back. Like I said, it's just the reverse. So what was original on the left is now on the right. What is on the right is now on the left. That is how you do it with a cable needle. Okay, so I worked 3 just plain rows of stockinette. So you can see that cross is still there. I'll show you what my mother taught me in terms of not using this extra needle. It's the same principle. We're gonna do a right cross just for simplicity, so the same cross that we did before. I'm gonna knit until I wanna do that cross. So here. So how she taught me is now, so these are the 6 stitches that we wanna work with that you can see here. So historically what I said we would do was that we would pass these next 3 onto that cable needle and then hold it in the back. Instead, what you do is you kind of take your right needle and you hook it into the 3 stitches that you want to cross. So in this case, we want these 3 in the back. We would move the stitches on the left side in the front. It's a little finicky, you gotta get them in. Okay, so now that those are on that needle, as you can see, these are the 3 that are going to cross over these ones that are then gonna be in the back. Sometimes this is a little scary, but what you do next is so that you have these 3 stitches on your right needle, you're gonna pinch back here the ones that you need to move, slide them off, and carefully collect them onto your left needle. So as you can see, sorry, that one's in the way. As you can see here, those 3 stitches which were originally on the right are now on the left needle, and then these 3 stitches that were on the left that are now on the right are on the right needle. You can then pass those right needle stitches back to the left, and then just knit across as normal. So in turn, you did the same right cross as before. Oops, missed a strand. Without a cable needle. Same look. But ever since my mom showed me, it's been life-changing. You don't always have to look for that needle when you're working on a project because for some reason it always seems to go missing when you need it. And 2, it just kind of simplifies your workflow a little bit more because you're not kind of balancing a 3rd random tool. That being said, to my earlier point, if you need a cable needle or you find like not cabling with a cable needle unintuitive, by all means keep the tool in because it's there if you need it. Number 7 is that fiber has memory. This one comes kind of literally and figuratively. Literally in the sense that I think this is especially talked about in the terms of animal fibers where they kind of remember the shape that they were like dried in, and so therefore when you block, you oftentimes try to shape it into the final form. But what I mean by figuratively is also that I find that knitting, because it's a very like progressive process, as well as something that like yarn has smells, like wool has a really lovely smell, and it's just such a tactile thing that it forms really great memories in your head. I look at the projects that I have around like my office and I can remember like that period of life that I was working on it and the ways that I was feeling, and I feel like that's such a lovely way to make memory. In this last year, every time we did a traveling opportunity, I try to go to a yarn store and pick up a skein or 2 to kind of build those memories and associations. And so I have a whole bunch of yarn from Alaska when we went to do our Alaskan trip. I have a whole bunch of yarn from Seattle. I have some yarn from our anniversary weekend, and I'm not saying that you should grow attached to your items, and the people always talk about how like you shouldn't become like so like object attached, but I also think there's something so special about being like able to take memories from things that you've worked on. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. It brings me a lot of joy just like thinking about all the stuff and all the memories that are in all these fibers that you get to wear. Like this isn't just a piece of art that you put on the wall, which art is beautiful by the way, but it's like something that you live your life in, you know? And I think that's absolutely incredible. And then lastly, not to get too cliche, is that the knitting community is a dream. You guys have honestly transformed my knitting experience this last year. I think When I was first starting to knit in the first 3 months, I was doing it very like secludedly at home with myself, and while I was talking to my husband a lot about like the projects I was working on, it's just not the same when you talk to a community member who is also as enthralled with the projects that you're working on as you are. And so I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to you guys for making the last year an incredible year. I'm so happy that I decided to start this YouTube channel and engage with you guys a little bit more. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all the comments, all the love, and all the encouragement. Some projects would not be completed without you guys. And I am just so incredibly grateful to be part of this community and have found you guys, and I cannot say enough good things about it. With all of that being said, I wanted to give my thanks and show my love and support to you guys and insert like a little secret giveaway here. I am giving away 2 $30 gift cards to a local yarn shop near you. So all you need to do to enter this giveaway is leave your Instagram handle down below in a comment along with your favorite local yarn shop, and I will pick a winner. Maybe I'll insert the date where I'll pick the winner. I'll announce the winner on my Instagram as well as contact them through DM on Instagram. So if anybody else reaches out to you anywhere else and not from my specific Instagram handle, which is bymwu, then please ignore them. But yeah, I wanted to say thank you so much for an incredible year. I'm so excited for 2024. I learned a lot. I hope to learn a lot more. I hope to knit a lot more. And yeah, thank you guys so much for everything. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.